To Kenya next, where floods have led to outbreaks of so-called neglected tropical diseases and infections, which could be deadly if not treated early. The immediate reason? Floods overwhelming basic sanitation infrastructure. My colleague Edith Kimani went to Kakamega in Kenya to find out more.
Simon Okech has done well at school. And when his mother Christine asks what he'd like as a reward, he asks for a bicycle. There's no way she can afford that. The family of 7 lives modestly, dependent on the farm produce Christine sells. So when the 7-year-old fell ill recently, it took some time for Christine to raise the money for an X-ray, even though it cost less than 10 euros. The diagnosis of intestinal worms surprised everyone.
I couldn't believe it. When we went to the hospital, he was given the deworming medication, and they were coming out in his vomit and his stool. There were so many worms in his stomach.
Simon is one of many children in this area who were infected with worms. Without modern sanitation systems, worm eggs easily contaminate food and water. Because Simon didn't get deworming tablets in good time, the worms developed and ended up laying eggs in his gut, requiring him to get intestinal obstruction surgery.
I felt so much pain for my child. I would never want any other child to go through that. It was agonizing.
Sustained flooding in Kenya in recent months has made things very bad for the country's poorest people. NGO Amref Health Africa is now working with the communities to provide education on the link between climate change and health.
We experience climate change either largely through too much water in the form of floods or lack of water in the form of droughts. When floods happen, there's normally wash-off of infrastructures, including the basic water sanitation and hygiene infrastructure in households. We have seen toilets sinking, and what that does is it promotes a scenario or a situation whereby now communities cannot use those toilets. And then you see the cycle of transmission of the intestinal worms kicks in again.
This homestead is one of just a few in the village with a pit latrine toilet. Most people here relieve themselves outside on their farms, making things even worse. Intestinal worms are not the only disease that people in this region have to grapple with after events like floods. Bilharzia or the snail fever is another. Now, the Kenyan government has made efforts to eradicate these diseases, but has been unable to yet. Dr. Mushangi calls for new ways to provide infrastructure for those most vulnerable to problems like worms and snail fever.
And some of these things is like making sure that water sanitation and hygiene services are available to the people, using innovative models with investments coming from different sectors, and having the community also being as co-investors.
Simon has fully recovered from the worms and the surgery and says he wants to become a doctor. He still wants a bike, but will have to wait till he's big enough to use his father's.
For more on this, let's bring in Irene Chami, Director Programs for the End Fund. Hello, Irene. We just saw in our report that Simon Okech was one of the lucky ones. Doctors found his worms and he's cured. Now, if he hadn't been treated early enough, what could have happened?
For Simon's case, it was serious, actually, and could have been fatal. Because at the point at which surgery was required, it means that the infestation was really heavy, and that would have led to intestinal blockage. That means restricting absorption of food or liquids through the small intestines and the large intestines. So he was very lucky to have been found and surgery undertaken so that he can be able to live, quality life.
Right. The good news is it is treatable, which begs the question, if intestinal worms are treatable, why is the problem so widespread?
Yeah, I must say intestinal worms is the most common neglected tropical disease and affects a lot of populations worldwide. basically, intestinal worms are caused by eggs that are ingested through human feces. So this really is a factor of poor sanitation, poor access to clean water, and even poor hygiene practices. So if those three factors are not taken care of, then the likelihood of a community or individuals getting infected with intestinal worms is very high. So once you get into contact with infected feces, then and you ingest it, then that's how you get the worms. So it's really, if you look at the burden in Africa, it's really high just because of those basic necessities of sanitation and hygiene.
Now, we introduced you as working for the End Fund. In simple terms, tell us about your work exactly in Kenya.
So the End Fund's goal, basically globally and also within Kenya, is to control and eliminate neglected tropical diseases. And there are quite a number. WHO has basically confirmed 20 of those entities that exist, but within Kenya, there are 17. However, the most common one of them is intestinal worms. So for us as the End Fund, we galvanize private sector funding to be able to support governments as well as our local implementing partners to be able to address and accelerate control and elimination. Now, we work in 6, the most common entities, which are intestinal worms, which I've mentioned, bilharzia, trachoma, elephantiasis, river blindness, and visceral leishmaniasis. So our work is really to support the control and elimination efforts because intestinal worms can be treatable, can be controlled, and can be interrupted.
Right, that's definitely good to know. So everything involves money, right? If we talk about treatment, it's not for free, is it? So how much does it cost to protect children from the most frequent NTDs? Give me an example.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. To control intestinal worms in children, it costs less than $1 to be able to just buy the one tablet that the child needs to take. And really, it's one of those areas where we as an organization are trying to galvanize efforts within government to really invest in the control of and elimination of NTDs because it's inexpensive. It takes just looking at certain factors. Once you address water and sanitation, infrastructure and access, you significantly reduce and control intestinal worms. So our efforts have been to just advocate and support governments to prioritize, create that awareness, because it's very interesting. You may not feel anything as a child or as an adult. You may not feel anything that there's no pain. So it's very difficult for you to be able to, for you to feel that you're infected. But without treatment, it leads to what you saw in terms of Simon's case.
Right. More than 40% of the global NTD burden is concentrated in Africa. Most of the End Fund's work is focused on the continent. What do you hope to achieve with your programs?
And this is why we are so passionate as the End Fund in supporting countries, because we cannot, in this era, be looking at, addressing the neglected tropical diseases. It's not the diseases that are neglected, but it's the people. And the people who are affected are really the most poor or marginalized communities, and prioritization to address that this issue has really been neglected by governments. So for us, our efforts is to really create that awareness and work closely with the government and private sector partners to be able to just address this, because it really requires minimal investment to be able to return on investment. So it's an area that it's treatable, it's preventable. So really that is why we're really passionate about this work.
And you're doing a good job at that. I like what you said at the end. It's not the disease that is neglected, but the people. Irene Chami, Director of Programs for the End Fund. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.